Welcome, everyone, to the MMA Happy Hour podcast. I am Kyle Anthony, your host for today. We are talking UFC Baku, headlined by Khalil Roundtree and Jamal Hill. We're going to be breaking down 4 plays like we always do on the show. And last weekend, we got the shit kicked out of us at UFC Atlanta. Not a good look overall. Week prior at UFC 316, the event I was at, cashed a max bet, hit some tickets there, felt good about it. And coming into the week last weekend, felt good, but boy, did things not really pan out. Ugly performance overall. That's part of the game here. I've made money for my clients the last 6 years consecutively. I plan on doing it again here in 2025. So Baku is the spot to be and where we're going to bounce back. So if you want to become a client, link down in the description. Already have plays up for clients. We'll be adding as we get closer to fight night. So with that being said, let's dive right into the main event of the evening between Khalil Roundtree and Jamal Hill. Now, we've got Khalil sitting around minus 130 on the comeback here on Hill, plus 110. Very interesting line here. Now, both of these guys are coming off ugly losses, like me last weekend, ugly losses overall. You've got Hill, who got knocked out by Yuri Prochazka, and then you've got Khalil Roundtree, who got slapped around by Pereira for a couple rounds and then got knocked out. Now, I do think that the market kind of a little bit, overreacted a little bit to just the fact that, you had Roundtree just kind of get to the 4th round. And I think there's too much that is being really made of that look going into this fight overall, especially the fact you've got Khalil at a favorite price tag here. When you go back, you watch that fight with Pereira and, obviously you've got, Khalil who made it 4 rounds, and you've got Hill who made it 1 round with Pereira. But even in that fight there, I think too much is being made of it here, where you do have, Pereira doubled him up in significant strikes, 127-61, knocked him out in the 4th round there. And I just think that right now it's a little bit of an overreaction here. But with that being said, Yuri on the other side here, where Hill versus Yuri was also a terrible, showing for Hill. But the difference here, I do think that is a little bit, is the fact that, that was the best version I think we've ever seen of Yuri Prochazka. I mean, normally that's the guy who's got his hands low, who's, doing a lot of like goofy shit and just not really committing to really combinations, not really committing to the head movement. And that is really where I thought he stepped up really well in that fight there, where it really had Hill lost. I think Hill at that point, I think he just was unprepared for that fight. I thought he looked, a little bit more out of shape than he normally does. And I just think that this was a spot where, Yuri was able to utilize the footwork, utilize the head movement, and just really was able to pick him apart. But in this fight here on Saturday that we're going to have, I do think that there are multiple advantages here on the Hill side, especially at a price tag number. And I think the biggest thing here when you're looking at this fight is going to be the fact that, Hill's going to have far better volume and far better pace. And I think that is going to be the keys to victory for him overall. We've seen consistently Hill has pushed out that volume, has really been able to push out that pace at any point where any fight has been extended. And he does have some power in his hands as well. And the big issue here for Khalil is the fact that, he just doesn't he doesn't commit to the combination. He just doesn't put out any type of volume overall. And you look at them over their UFC career, Hill has doubled the significant strikes landed per minute from Khalil Roundtree. You've got Hill at 7 significant strikes landed per minute, Khalil at 3.7. I think that is going to be a major factor in this fight. But also you've got a guy in Hill who's going to push out that volume, who's going to be able to push out that pace. And now you've got Khalil Roundtree, who's a guy who has a negative striking differential, and it's pretty sizable, and he's hittable. And that is something I think does work out well for Hill in this spot, because if you got a guy that's not going to throw out volume, a guy that can take the shots and is going to be very hittable, that's a perfect recipe for somebody like Hill, who's going to be long, rangy, look to land the shots, have the better boxing, have those straight shots. I think right down the pike, those are going to work out throughout this fight here. And, sure, early, I'm sure that Khalil is going to be able to, make some interesting moments. But I do think that you've got Hill that's going to be having a lot of success. Plus, you've got the fact that, Khalil, not only does Roundtree have low volume and low pace, but also on top of that, I don't like his cardio. I think he's got weak cardio. So now you've got a guy who is just not pushing out volume, who can be hittable and doesn't have the best cardio and isn't really built for 5 rounds. And I think we've seen Hill be definitely, a guy that can go 5 rounds against Glover Teixeira. We've seen it. And I think that is where, again, this starts to extend the fight for him and really start to show that he should probably be the favorite in this spot here. I think early you're going to see Roundtree. He's going to have opportunities. There's no doubt about it. But I think as this fight wears on, the longer this fight goes, you're going to see Hill really picking it up, really laying the more impactful shots and finding a way to victory. And also the fact that the strength of schedule, I think you've got to give that to also to Hill overall. You look at the 2 guys that Roundtree faced to get to the title was Chris Daukaus, who was on an 0-4 run. And then after that, it was Anthony Smith, who came in on a week notice and was on a 1-4 run. I think this is a great bounce back spot here for Jamal Hill, especially at a plus number. Now we are starting to see the market come in a little bit here, and we're starting to see money come in on Jamal Hill. I agree with that line movement here, but I am definitely taking Jamal Hill to get the job done in the main event. Next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Mektik Orolbai. He is minus 163. On the comeback here, we've got Tofik Musayev, if I said that correctly. And this is going to be, your classic grappler versus striker type of matchup here. You've got Orolbai as a guy that, is just going to look to be relentless with the takedowns, come forward, dive at legs as much as possible and look to win positionally. And then your side, you've got Tofik, who is a guy that is, definitely has some power and is going to be throwing heavy-handed shots throughout this fight. But the thing that I think when you're looking at this fight is that, there is a lot of red flags, I think, on the Tofik side here. I understand that he's the plus money side here, but I think that this line should be wider. And I do think we are getting a little bit of a discount here on the Orolbai side just because of his last fight, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the few red flags here on the Tofik side is first being the fact that he's 35 years old making his UFC debut. I don't like that. I think that is a bad sign here. I know that, earlier on in his career, maybe 4 years ago or somewhere around there, there was talks about this guy. Hey, man, he could really be something in the UFC. And, he's getting his opportunity here, but, he has bounced around, other organizations here, he was in Bellator, he was in Ryzen. Even his last 2 wins in Ryzen were not that impressive overall, even especially just look at competition level. If you just give the records here, one guy was 17-8, the other guy was 19-11-4. So, not the most impressive overall. And you also got to add in the fact that his last fight at Ryzen, the last time he stepped in the cage was November of 2023. So you're talking slightly under 2 years. The guy hasn't fought. He's making his UFC debut, and he's 35 years old. I think that is just a terrible recipe, I think, in this spot for him. And then you look at stylistically here, I think that this is, again, terrible matchup here for Tofik. You look at it, this is going to be by far the toughest wrestler he has had to face in his career. And you got a guy who wants to be a striker, who wants to throw 100% power, who wants to, land these big shots. I think this is going to be a big problem for him, where you got Orolbai, who's going to look to consistently look for those takedowns and have that smothering pressure and really just kind of slow down anything that Tofik can do. And also the fact that you see with Tofik, what he does is he doesn't throw punches and combinations and punches and combinations. He doesn't do it. There isn't combinations there. He's a one-off kind of guy. He's going to throw one big shot and that's it. And he's looking to really just, knock you out, hurt you with the big shot, and then kind of stand there and look to land that perfect big shot again. These lapses in time, these lapses in action, I think are perfect for Orolbai to look for takedowns. And the only way that you really push away a wrestler and a guy who's going to pressure is volume. You got to volume it out. You got to just push volume. You got to throw. You got to keep that wrestler on that back foot. And that's going to be where there's going to be harder times for him to really cut that distance, plant his feet, and look for those takedowns. And I just don't think that Tofik really has that. He does have the power. There's no doubt about it. But you also got to add in the fact that, really, I think Tafik's, win condition is really only going to be a knockout. I don't really see him being a minute winner here. I don't see him controlling the action. I don't see any of that happening. I think he's going to have a knockout here. Now, the other issue for Tofik is the fact that, Orolbai has never been finished in his professional career. The guy is durable. The guy is tough. And that's just going to make things and, the opportunities for Tofik even tougher here to find a way to get a victory. And then other way that we were just talking about before was, his most recent fight for Orolbai, which was against Rebecca. That fight there showed and proved his durability. Now, he lost that fight, But boy, he took a beating and he just kept shooting takedowns coming forward. It looked like his eye was, basically shut. It looked like, his skull was cracked. I mean, it just looked terrible. And yet the guy was still shooting takedowns. I thought that was pretty impressive for him, at least showing the toughness, at least showing that dog in him to keep coming forward. Now, I do think the mix of durability, I think the wrestling, the cardio is just going to be too much here for Tafiq. I think that he's going to get the control time. He's going to get the top position here. I think really the only reason Tafiq is in this fight is because this fight is happening in his backyard here. It's happening in his country. So I only think that that's the reason he is on this card. I think this sets up very nicely for Orolbai to get the victory here. So I actually think this line should be sizably wider at this point. So I'm comfortable with this minus 163. I think this could look minus 300 by the time this is said and done. So I'm taking Mektik Orolbai to get the job done. And the next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Muhammad Naimov. He is minus 320. On the comeback here, we've got Baghdad Grad. He is plus 235. Now, money has consistently come in on Naimov here, and I get it. The guy is, got some power. The guy's got the ability to throw those big shots. He's got physicality. He's got strength. There are those things that he does have, and that can be a situation where maybe a recipe for success here. Also, the fact that this guy does not care. He will cheat. He will break the rules. He just does not give a shit what the ref thinks at all. He is going to do what he needs to do to get the victory. Sometimes they get called, sometimes they don't, but Naimov will try and draw that line and toe that line, I should say, to see if he can get through some of these things here. But with that being said, I think this line is wide. I definitely think this line is wide. And again, this is another line that is consistently getting wider as we get closer to fight night on Saturday. But, there are good things I think that Naimov does, but I think a lot of the things Grad could probably do better, or not even better, but the fact he can counter, I think, a lot of those things. And, you kind of go back at some of the fights that Naimov had. I was not that impressive going back and watching some of these fights here. And, you've got, sure, he was able to go out there and get a victory over Jamie Malarkey. It's Jamie Malarkey. It's a walking punching bag. But you've got, Thaniel Wood, which is, I think Wood is a solid fighter. But this is a fight where there was just multiple, when we're talking about, breaking the rules, there was about 3, maybe 4. These are fight-changing things that he was doing, grabbing the cage, grabbing the glove, eye pokes, all kinds of things here. And, he was able to get the victory. Now, even with that being said, and all these, fouls happening that weren't called or whatever it is, still there, it was 50-48 on significant strikes. It was still a close fight with all of these fouls happening. It was the takedowns that really helped Naimov find success there, where he was able to get the 4 takedowns, get the control time, and get himself a victory. Now, the other one after that, the victory was against Eric Silva. Eric Silva breaks, his ankle in the first, 40 seconds of the fight, so he gets that there. And then the other one here is against Khan Offley, who I think is awful, who is just, I don't think he's even UFC caliber here. He's 0-2 in the UFC. And even in that fight, even against Khan Offley, a guy I don't think is that good, he was still, it was close. It was 32-31 on significant strikes, very low, but it was the 2 takedowns that gave Naimov the victory there. And now where I'm going with the fact that some of the things that Grad can really kind of counter, that Naimov does well. And, Naimov is a guy that just wins in small margins. He's not really extending, when he's got somebody hurt, he doesn't really be able to say, hey, he put a stamp on that round. He doesn't really do it. He fights very close margins in these fights here. And also he cheats, and he's relied on some of this cheating here. So, Naimov does have that strength. But I do think Grad and his strength and physicality can kind of nullify some of the things that I think that really make Naimov good, which is, again, that strong physicality that he has in the clinch, up against the fence, even when he's throwing big shots, he's got those opportunities to really utilize that. But I think also not just the fact that Grad can kind of nullify some of those things, but I also think that the big issue here for Naimov is the fact he's another guy that is low volume. He's not, that's the reason why these margins are not wide at all, is because of the fact that he does have, he's not landing, he's not pulling the trigger, and he's keeping his opponent in the fight in certain spots here, doesn't let his hands go, isn't throwing big combinations here. And I think that that's where somebody like Grad can make this a very close fight, especially closer than this line indicates when you're talking about a plus 235 dog in Grad. But I think Grad is going to be able to push the pace. I think he's going to be able to offensive wrestle when he needs to. I think he can mix it up a little bit. I think his shots and his aggressiveness crashing the pocket, I think is going to make this fight very interesting, very close. And I like him here in this spot here. I do think that this plus number is pretty solid overall. I think Naimov, this might get wider here, which, you may want to wait if you're trying to look to get a little bit more bang for your buck here. But I think Bagnon Grad plus 235 is the value side in this fight. And the last one here we're going to talk about is going to be Jung Young Park minus 195. On the comeback here, we've got Ishmael Naurdiev. He is plus 160. Now, I understand why Park is the favorite here, and I think the biggest reason is the fact that this is the second stint for Ishmael. It was his second time in the UFC, and he was in the UFC years ago, went 2-2, got cut from the organization, fought in, I think it was Brave CF, and had mixed results there. He was 4-3 run after the UFC, and yes, he lost some regional fights. But when you look at the other part about this is the fact that, Park, some of his victories that he's had, these guys probably should be on the regional scene. I don't even think they should be in the UFC. You're talking about like Dennis Tululium. I mean, that guy just blocks punches with his face and has limited skill. And you're talking about then Joseph Holmes, another guy that just had really became nothing in the UFC. I mean, Teflon, the Don. I mean, these guys are just, bottom of the barrel guys. And you've got Park, who's now 34 years old. I mean, they're just giving him really lower level types of guys. Even in this is Ishmael coming in. I don't even think that, shouldn't Park be facing some higher guys? He's on a 5-1 run right now, and he's fighting a guy on his second, fight back at the UFC. So it's just a very weird situation. But you also look at the fact that he is 5-1 on his last 6. 3 of those victories came by split decision, and some of those victories he outright looked like he lost. So that again is a spot where he's fighting very close margins. He's getting victories, and not only the fact that I think that yeah, sure, he's got the wrestling. But Park is not dangerous. He's a guy that's going to lay on you. He's going to try to win positionally. He's going to try to have that control time. If he can think of a submission, sure. But really, it's just kind of grinding up on you. And that, I think, is where you've got Ishmael now at this point. He's 28 years old. His last time he was in the UFC, he had to be, 23? So I think there's a lot of growth that he has had at this point here. And, even his last fight, he came in on short notice against Bruno Silva, which I thought was a tough fight for him, but he still came in there, got takedowns, got the victory. And what I liked about it is that he's rounding out his skill set. He's able to go out there, look for takedowns now. He shot 13 takedowns in that fight. And I think that also opens up some opportunities here for him on Saturday against Park, where Park is a guy that, yes, he likes to get his own wrestling going, but also the fact that he can be taken down when guys look to take him down. And that, I think, is where we've seen even against Andre Muniz, where he was taken down 11 times. That was his only loss over the last 6 fights. But that, to me, right there even shows more where that was where for Muniz, that was triple the amount of takedowns he's had in one particular fight, triple. And, he's had 11 UFC fights, and he's a grappler, and that's where he wants to take it. And the fact that he was able to find success, against Park, I think he's going to find success. I think Ishmael is going to find success here. I believe that Ishmael can mix it up. I think he's a far better striker between these two, faster hands, better combinations, the harder hitter, better footwork. And I think if he mixes in some takedowns, it's going to open up more opportunities on the feet. So at this plus number here, again, I am taking that plus money in this spot here. I'm taking Ishmael Naurdiev to get the job done, plus 160. So there you have it for my plays for UFC Baku. And if you want to become a client, link down in the description. I have got, what do I have? I think I've got like 3 plays up right now. Going to be adding to that. And I've got a huge card I'm going to be dropping for next weekend for UFC 317. Absolutely love that card from a betting perspective. Cannot wait. Will be locking in a max bet and another max bet winner for next weekend. So with that being said, let's get the job done. See you next week, and let's cash.